say hello to the chosen ones. Every secret has to choose between truth and destruction at some point. And for you, the secrets chose to destroy the people who made them. Let's start with something that researchers have actually shown before we get into the full breakdown. The mind can only handle so many lies before it starts to betray itself. Psychologists call it cognitive leakage, when someone is trying so hard to keep a story straight that the truth comes out like a prisoner escaping from jail. And let's be honest, the people who planned against you weren't the best at manipulating others. They were using cheap emotional glue to hold lies together, hoping that nothing would fall apart. Spoiler alert, everything went wrong. The fact that their fall didn't happen quietly or gracefully is what makes this story so crazy. No, they broke like a phone screen that fell face first on concrete. And they told everything, every secret meeting, every whispered plan, and every silly plan they came up with, as if they were trying out for a villain role that nobody wanted them to play. What they didn't know, and what they couldn't know, is that the universe has perfect timing and a bad sense of humor. While you were out there living your life, getting through storms, and leveling up, they were behind the scenes having emergency meetings to figure out why their plans kept failing. They thought they were in charge of the story. Life was getting ready to throw a plot twist so sharp that it cut through every lie they ever told. And the best part is that you didn't have to force the truth to come out. Their own guilt clock ran out, so the truth came out. Their partnership fell apart. Their trust was gone. Their secret plans got out like a bucket with 30 holes. It's funny. People always think that exposure comes from catching enemies. But sometimes enemies get tired, and that makes them more vulnerable. Tired of putting on a show. Sick of making excuses for each other. They were sick of pretending to be a well-oiled machine when they couldn't even keep their own lives in order. It wasn't even surprising by the time everything came out. It was like poetry. So get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about people being messy. It's a story about how the plot that people thought would break you actually exposed them. And believe me, when we talk about what really happened behind your back, you'll see why they acted the way they did. First of all, they never thought you would live longer than their story. The people who plotted against you didn't just want to hurt you. They tried to plan out who you would become. They imagined a whole future for you in their heads. One where you stayed small, confused, overwhelmed, and stuck in the damage they did. Their plan wasn't just to stop you from making progress. It was to trap you in a story that made you predictable and powerless. They really thought they had the power to set your limits. They could never have guessed that you would be able to outgrow places that were meant to kill you. Their story depended on you being stuck in emotional quicksand. They thought you would give up. They thought you would be too tired to fight for your life. They thought you would keep going through the same cycles they put you in. And most of all, they hoped you wouldn't see how much they were affecting your path. They were sure that you would never change from the version of yourself that they liked. So when you started to grow mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, when you started to make decisions based on clear thinking instead of pain, the whole plan fell apart. They never thought you would get better. They never got ready for you to get better. They never thought you would stop seeing yourself through their eyes and start seeing yourself through the truth. Your change was the twist that ruined their story. That's why everything eventually came out. People start to panic when their manipulation stops working. All of a sudden, the lies don't work, the alliances don't work, the whispers don't sound the same. People start to talk because the story they tried to control falls apart as soon as you stop playing the part they gave you. You lived longer than the version of you they needed to stay strong. And once you lived longer than their story, their whole operation was pointless. That's when the truth comes out. Not because they became honest, but because their plan ran out of steam as soon as you took back your own story. Second, their guilt was louder than their lies. People who plot against you usually think they can get away with it. They tell themselves that if they keep telling the story, defending it, and repeating it, the lie will become their truth. But guilt can build up in the background, like pressure under the floorboards. At some point, it becomes too heavy to hide. That's what happened to the people who went after you. They didn't confess because they suddenly became morally upright or noble. They admitted what they did because it was too much for them to handle. Guilt is like that. It doesn't come all at once. It starts with little cracks, like not being able to sleep, getting nervous, overthinking conversations, and staying away from people who know too much. Then it gets louder, anxiety that comes out of nowhere, fear of being found out, and paranoia that everyone can see right through them. They practice their lies in their heads so much that it makes them tired, and eventually, their guilt will be stronger than their ability to act like nothing is wrong. That's when the truth comes out, sometimes in parts, and other times all at once. People don't realize how loud guilt can be. It gets in the way of their thoughts. It makes it harder for them to make decisions. They react too strongly to things that used to seem normal. The guilt of what they did to you is a constant reminder that the story they were telling was based on harm, jealousy, insecurity, and manipulation. They broke down as soon as they realized they couldn't handle the mental noise anymore. You didn't have to face them. You didn't have to show them. They couldn't get away from their own conscience, which became a spotlight. And here's the deeper truth. They were never ready for the emotional cost of tearing down an innocent person. They thought their lies would last forever. But guilt is the price you pay for doing something wrong. And eventually, it gets too expensive to keep up. That's why everything fell. Their guilt was stronger than any lies they ever told. And once it started talking, it wouldn't stop. 3. Their plan stopped working as soon as you got older. They thought you couldn't handle what they threw at you, which was their biggest mistake. They thought that you would stay broken, that you would stay weak, and that their plans, schemes, and calculated moves would work. They treated you like a chess piece that they could move around, but they didn't take into account one important thing: your growth. Everything changes when you grow. Growth breaks things. Every plot, every manipulation, and every secret effort is useless when you grow. Their plan stopped working as you started to grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The lies that were supposed to mean something suddenly didn't. The people who were supposed to carry out the plan realized it was pointless because the target, the person they thought they could control, was no longer in the same place. You weren't following the rules they had set anymore. They no longer saw you as the person who would trip over every obstacle. They couldn't predict what you would do, touch you, or stop you. What used to seem like careful and smart planning turned out to be nothing but wasted time and embarrassing mistakes. And when a plot stops being useful, it won't be long before it starts to show signs of wear. People start blaming each other, mistakes start piling up, and the original plan falls apart because it can't handle all the stress. They try to hide, they try to save, they try to scare, but none of that matters now. They can't reach you anymore. You've grown beyond what they can do to you. The thing they thought would destroy you is what gave them away. This is why the truth came out. They had nothing else to use against you. No power to keep the secret alive, and no reason to keep it alive. They thought their plan was strong enough to break you, but it was already useless. And when they realized how useless they were, they panicked and confessed. You didn't have to fight. They lost because you grew up and left the battlefield they thought they were in charge of. In this case, growth became the secret weapon that brought down their whole operation. Number 4. Someone they knew thought you were too good to be destroyed. Not everyone in their group was as heartless as they seemed. At least one of the people who plotted against you couldn't ignore the truth any longer. They were aware of what was going on. They saw that it wasn't fair. They also understood that no matter how hard the others tried to hurt you, your honesty, strength, and clarity would always be safe. You weren't just getting by. You were doing so well that the whole thing couldn't be justified. Someone chose to break the code of silence and get involved because of that. It's interesting how this works. People who plot against others often live in bubbles of false belief, sure that their alliances can't be broken, but partnerships based on fear, jealousy, and insecurity always have problems. And in those cracks, your conscience can get in. That's what happened here. Someone quietly watched everything happen and then decided that it was time to stop. They didn't do it out of loyalty to you, at least not in the obvious way. They were driven by praise. You knew your worth, your strong spirit, and the fact that hurting you was not only wrong but also impossible. This is the point at which the story starts to fall apart. When someone in the inner circle decides that morality is more important than loyalty to a plan, the whole web of lies falls apart. Whispers become admissions, secrets become proof, and the people who are controlling things suddenly see that they're losing control. You didn't have to tell them, threaten them, or outsmart them. They showed themselves because one person's sense of right and wrong couldn't stand to see you hurt anymore. And what makes it even more surprising is that this choice wasn't made out of weakness. It came from being clear. Someone finally saw the difference between what was easy and what was right, and their decision to act set off a chain reaction. They didn't realize how strong human conscience was, so the plan that once seemed safe fell apart. Your purity, strength, and quiet strength were enough to start the awakening, and that was enough to break the whole operation. 5. They figured out that you were the wrong person to bet against. At some point, they stopped seeing you as a target and started to think of you as a force they could never control. As soon as they realized that every lie, plan, and trick had failed to shake you, they panicked. They started to realize that the person they were dealing with wasn't just someone they could push around. They were dealing with someone who would rise to the occasion no matter what, someone whose strength and clarity were stronger than their cruelty. Manipulators are scared of that realization because it changes the whole power dynamic. The hunter turns into the hunted, the plan falls apart, and the pride that drove it is replaced by fear. This isn't about you being strong in some vague way. It's about the fact that their math was wrong from the start. They thought they could control you, that they could guess how you would react, and that they could use your pain as a weapon. They thought you were less than you really were, which is why they made all of their guesses, and that was the end of them. They watched as your life went on. Your mind stayed sharp, and your spirit stayed strong. Every little win you had made their plan weaker, and every time they tried to trick you and failed, their confidence fell apart. Fear has a way of making people tell the truth. When they realized they had picked the wrong person to bet against, they panicked and let slip bits of the truth they had worked so hard to keep hidden. Their confessions didn't mean they were admitting to doing something wrong. They were about staying alive. They knew that carrying on with the plot against you would only make things worse for them. After all, the person who bends is never the wrong one. They are the ones who reveal everything, whether they mean to or not, just by being there and not going along with the story that was made up for them. They were stuck because they had made a mistake by the time the truth came out. They lost their arrogance, their scheming, and their sense of control as soon as they realized how big you were. You weren't just out of reach. They made a mistake by thinking you were them. That one realization, destroyed the very foundation of everything they had planned. Number 6. Your silence made what they did louder. You didn't even know it, but one of the most dangerous things you did was stay quiet while they worked so hard to kill you. Every insult, scheme, and whispered plan they made against you was made worse by how calm and quiet you were. People who plot against others depend on how other people react. They love it when things are crazy, scary, or angry. They want to see people flinch, break down emotionally, get confused, and hesitate. Your silence took all of that away from them. It didn't make you weak. It made their lies sound louder. Everything they did and said was suddenly in a vacuum where no one could escape the effects of their own actions. You made the truth speak for itself by not answering. When you didn't respond, their tricks, which they had carefully hidden, became painfully clear. Lies that were meant to confuse became very clear. The energy you gave, or didn't give, was like a spotlight that showed the cracks they were trying to hide. You weren't fighting, arguing, or making excuses for yourself. You were just living your life, standing up for yourself, and letting what they did show who they were. In this case, silence didn't mean absence. It was a strategy, whether on purpose or by accident, and it made their guilt, fear, and lack of skill impossible to ignore. And this is what makes it so special. Because you were so quiet, they had to face themselves. They couldn't change reality to their advantage without your response. Every conversation, every secret meeting, and every dishonest alliance they made showed how badly they had done. They couldn't hide their lies because you were the calm center in the storm they thought they were in charge of. In the end, your silence didn't just keep you safe, it showed them. It made them feel desperate, scared, and exposed. It made them confess, slip up, and ruin the whole plan. They didn't realize how strong you were to stay still, endure, and let the truth do the work. And when everything was said and done, it was clear you didn't have to fight for justice, argue for clarity, or tell them yourself. Your silence said everything, louder than any words ever could. Number 7. They couldn't remember the story anymore. Lies are weak. Everyone involved has to remember their place, say the same lines, and keep the act going for them to live. The people who are plotting against you didn't know that plotting against someone smart and aware is like setting off a time bomb. The more they tried to control the story, the harder it was to keep it going. Every new layer of deception needed to be exact, and they weren't very good at being exact. They got details wrong, said things that were wrong, and slowly, almost without anyone noticing, their story began to fall apart. Memory is always the first thing to go wrong when a plot depends on a lot of people. Who said what? Who knew what? Who was supposed to take care of whom? It starts out small. Someone messes up a meeting. Someone is lying. Someone forgets when to do something. But those little mistakes add up like snow in an avalanche. In the end, the people who plotted are caught in the lies they made. To cover up their past lies, they have to lie again. And every lie makes things more tense until the whole story falls apart. This is exactly how their whole business fell apart. The plan was never just to hurt you. It was a show, a weak illusion held together by fear and coordination. But fear alone won't help with bad memories, bad planning, or egos that don't agree. Once one person made a mistake, the others did too, either because they were scared or because they were trying to fix the lie. The lies got louder than their control, and the inconsistencies became obvious. That's when the truth came out. They didn't admit it because they wanted to. They admitted it because they had no other choice. The story had gotten out of hand, and every time I tried to fix it, it got worse. They had to break because they were scared, stressed, and couldn't keep track of their own lies. In the end, the very thing they built to trap you turned out to be the thing that gave them away. Their fall wasn't very dramatic. It had to happen. You can only hold lies together for so long before the tide of reality washes them away, just like sandcastles. Number 8. Their plan couldn't handle your energy. There is a kind of power that doesn't need words, actions, or fighting. It simply exists. Your energy, the way you carried yourself, and the way you dealt with everything life through which you became a force they couldn't deal with. They didn't know that the strength of someone who won't give up isn't just something you can see. It spreads, attracts, and most importantly, it shows things. You didn't fight back against every move they made to control, manipulate, or sabotage you. Instead, you were just there, quietly intense. Your energy was so strong that they couldn't hide their lies and plans. They tried to keep the plot secret, tight, and well coordinated. But energy has a way of showing weakness. They didn't like how you were always calm and didn't let them manipulate you. They could tell the difference between who they thought you were and who you really were. Every time they tried to manipulate you, it backfired on them because you had a frequency they couldn't touch and a clarity they couldn't change. They tried to ignore it, push harder, and get other people to join them. But the more they fought, the clearer their actions became. Your kind of energy doesn't just protect, it also shows. People around you start to see things that don't add up. Rumors spread, alliances fall apart, and eventually, the pressure of being seen becomes too much to handle. They spilled because the tension from your constant energy made it impossible to keep up the act. You didn't have to talk to anyone. Your life, your attitude, and your strength made the cracks appear naturally, which is what makes it so hard for them. They figured out too late that the thing they were trying to control had already shown them the truth. Your energy didn't just make their lies look bad. It took apart the whole plot's base. It made people see it without saying a word, fighting, or having a single dramatic confrontation. They didn't fail because of evidence, smart moves, or stress. Your energy, which was steady and unyielding, made it impossible for lies to survive. Number 9. They finally caught that you saw more than you said. They thought you could be fooled, distracted, and controlled from the start, and they saw your silence as a sign of weakness. They didn't know that even though you weren't talking, you were watching, thinking about, and writing down everything they did. You remembered every lie, scheme, and attempt to control or hurt you. You didn't have to say anything, fight back, or do anything else because your awareness was a silent witness to everything. And that knowledge scares people who get their power from keeping things secret. They eventually learn that no amount of lying can last in front of someone who sees everything. It's easy to think that someone who doesn't react isn't strong. They thought you were calm because you didn't know anything. They thought that being patient meant not doing anything. They thought that the more you held back, the more chances they had to change the story. But as time went on, they started to realize that their carefully planned lies weren't working the way they had hoped. Things they said in private didn't always match up. Their stories didn't match up, and they started to lose faith. The silence that used to seem like agreement suddenly became a mirror, showing their dishonesty and incompetence for all to see. And that mirror is what drove them to break. They knew you were never naive, never blind, and never easily tricked. You had always seen more than they could handle, more than they were willing to say, and definitely more than they could control. When that hit, they panicked. Lies started to come out, alliances fell apart, and the story that had been tightly held together for months, or even years, began to fall apart from the inside. You didn't get the truth by asking for it, confronting it, or exposing it. It came out because they finally realized that no matter how much they changed words, actions, or situations, you had already seen everything. You were too aware, too smart, and too down to earth for their plan to work. Someone who does well in the dark can't handle the weight of being seen in full light, and that's what made them break down and tell everything. 10. The person they trusted the most turned out to be their weakest link. Every group of people who plans to hurt someone has at least one person who thinks they can't be hurt. The one they think is the smartest, the most loyal, or the most careful. It's funny, but that's usually the person who ends up being the weak link. They were too proud to believe in someone who couldn't handle the stress, someone whose ego or nerves were bigger than their sense of duty. That person is the weak spot in the armor, the place where the carefully planned plot starts to fall apart. The dynamic is harsh and unavoidable. When you plan to hurt someone, you need everyone to keep secrets, remember all the lies, and cover up each other's mistakes. But people aren't perfect. Even the most loyal partner has limits. They can go over the edge because of stress, fear, guilt, or even just too much confidence. When that weak link starts to break down, the whole operation becomes unstable. Lies start to slip, things don't add up, and the tension between the plotters gets so high that the story they were trying to control starts to fall apart very quickly. This is exactly how the plan of your enemies fell apart. The first person to fall was the one they trusted the most and thought would never break. Maybe they were scared, maybe their conscience was too loud, or maybe they just got caught up in their own lies. No matter what their reason was, their failure set off a chain reaction. People started to confess, mistakes became clear, and the other people involved in the plot started to panic. Their plan, which had seemed foolproof, fell apart because it depended on one person who couldn't handle the lie. It wasn't just a mistake by the time the truth came out. It was a complete failure. They lost their confidence, control, and power because they trusted the wrong person too much. And that weak link, which they thought was their secret weapon, turned out to be what got them caught. The lesson is clear. In any story that involves lying, the person who thinks they can't be hurt is always the most vulnerable, because that's the person who will really break first. Number 11. They thought you were alone, but higher powers were watching you. One of the biggest mistakes they made was thinking you were alone and that no one was watching over you. They thought the chaos they caused would go unnoticed. They acted like your life was a blank canvas that they could ruin without any consequences, as if every move they made could stay hidden. What they didn't know is that things beyond their control were quietly watching everything, keeping track of every plan, every trick, and every attempt to hurt you. It's not just a matter of chance. It's all about timing, alignment, and the justice that always catches up with people who do bad things. The irony is harsh. They were very careful, believing that their careful planning and coordination made them untouchable. They thought that keeping things secret would protect them, but they didn't realize that the universe, or whatever higher power controls the balance of actions and consequences, has its own way of keeping track of things, noticing them, and acting. They could see every lie, every whisper, and every effort to turn reality against you in ways that you could never see. And in this case, observation wasn't passive. It made exposure possible. That's why their plan fell apart. The higher powers let things get more and more out of whack the more they tried to control events and outcomes. Little mistakes, stories that didn't match up, and nervous behavior got bigger and bigger until they were impossible to ignore. That confession wasn't a shock by the time it came. It had to happen. They thought they were keeping things secret, but they were wrong. Someone or something was always watching, always timing, and always waiting for the right moment to tell the whole truth. And that's the lesson they could never learn. People who are run against the right person get more attention than they can see, no matter how smart, sneaky, or mean they think they are. They were blind because they were arrogant, and their blindness made it possible for their actions to be seen. You weren't the only one. You weren't weak, and as soon as they tried to hurt you, higher powers made sure that their own lies led to their own downfall. Every confession, every leak, and every unraveling showed that someone or something was quietly keeping track. Number 12. They admitted to it because they needed a way out. They panicked when they realized that it was safer to stop plotting against you than to keep going. People don't often tell secrets because it's the right thing to do. They tell secrets because they feel trapped and want to get out. This is exactly what happened. The people who plotted didn't confess because they felt bad or sorry. They confessed because their instincts told them to. The whole operation they set up to control, manipulate, and hurt you became a problem. And the only way to stay safe was to start talking. People who put a lot of work into a plan think it's safe. They think that being loyal to their friends, being scared, and being careful about lying will keep them safe. But when things start to go wrong, the person they trusted the most, the unexpected conscience in their group, or even their own fading memory can put them in a tough spot. The story they thought was untouchable is suddenly falling apart, and the consequences of staying quiet seem much worse than admitting parts of the truth. Their confession is not brave, it's math. They start to leak information on purpose, hoping to limit the damage while looking helpful and trying to get out before the full weight of their wrongdoings catches up with them. It's interesting how desperation shows everything. When they start to worry about their own safety, it's hard to keep up the careful dance of lies. Things they thought were hidden come out, alliances fall apart, and inconsistencies blow up. The exit plan starts as a quiet word in private and quickly turns into a flood. And the whole time, they're desperately trying to protect themselves from the mess they made, which, ironically, reveals the whole plot faster than any investigation or confrontation could. The confession is just as much about them as it is about you in the end. They realized too late that the game they started wasn't winnable, that their choices had trapped them, and that it was too risky to keep hiding the truth because they needed to get away. The story came out and revealed everything they tried to keep hidden. You didn't have to face them. Their instinct to survive did it for you. Number 13. Your strength made them see that they were fighting fate. They weren't just after you. They were trying to fight against something they didn't know what it was. Every scheme, every plot, and every backhanded plan they made was meant to control your life. But they didn't realize that they didn't have the right to tell you what to do with your life. Your strength, your ability to keep going, change, and rise no matter what they threw at you, broke their sense of control. It wasn't because you were lucky or because things just worked out. It was that their whole plan ran into something much bigger than they could understand. Fate, timing, and the undeniable strength of someone who refused to be broken. They got more and more scared as they watched. Their whispers, plans, and alliances were meant to scare you and make you weaker. But they did the opposite. The more they tried to push a story, the more it became clear that you were untouchable in ways they could never explain. Every attack, and betrayal made you stronger instead of weaker. And the more they understood this, the more desperate and reckless they became. The person they thought they could crush was actually going exactly where they should have been and doing exactly what they should have been doing. This understanding is what makes people tell secrets. When someone realizes they're fighting a purpose or a calling, they lose confidence and panic. They aren't just afraid of failing. They are afraid of things that go beyond human revenge. The weight of inevitability starts to break down their whole plan. They can't keep up the act anymore because reality, your strength, and the undeniable force of destiny are all pointing to the truth. It wasn't because of your confrontation or exposure that everything came out. They knew they were up against something much bigger than themselves. They knew they weren't just failing because you were alive, growing, and had an unbreakable spirit. They were losing to fate itself. And at that moment of fear and understanding, everything they tried to keep hidden came out, leaving no part of their plan untouched, no secret revealed, and no lie exposed. Number 14. They finally saw themselves in a mirror you never held. It wasn't just about revealing their plan against you when the truth came out. It was about making them face who they were. In the end, all the plotting, manipulation, and secret plans came back to them in a way they couldn't ignore. They always thought that if they could control your life, your reactions, and the story, they would be safe. But the irony is harsh. Their own actions became the mirror, and they couldn't get away from what they saw. Every lie, every betrayal, and every plan they thought was secret was suddenly clear, and the person looking back at them was much worse than anyone else could have shown them. This is the point at which arrogance and reality meet. They didn't just see you, they saw themselves. For the first time, they saw how their choices affected others, how cruel they were, and how pointless their efforts were. The plan they made to hurt and control someone else showed that they were morally bankrupt, and that realization is heartbreaking because it's so close and can't be avoided. They could no longer blame accidents, other people, or situations. The reflection was only theirs. That's why the confession came out so easily. They weren't telling you the truth. They were admitting to themselves in the most public and clear way possible. Panic and shame were the ways that the truth came out. Because once you know about your own mistakes and bad behavior, you can't hide them anymore. The mirror makes people be honest, whether they want to or not, and in their case, it made them show their true selves. When the whole plot was out in the open, it was clear that confrontation was not what broke them. It was recognizing oneself. They finally knew who they were when they saw how they had lied to themselves. And the funny thing is that this news didn't just ruin their plan. It broke down the story they had made about themselves. When they saw the truth about themselves, their identity as schemers, manipulators, and winners in their own story went away. You didn't have to hold the mirror. They held it, and the truth broke it. In conclusion, what all of this shows is much more than just a story of betrayal and exposure. It's a plan for what happens when the truth meets strength, clarity, and the right time. Every plot, scheme, and secret plan they came up with to ruin you didn't just fail. It went wrong in ways they could never have imagined. They broke down because they didn't think you could handle their tricks and get stronger. They spilled everything because guilt, fear, and self-preservation overtook the lies they had built their entire operation on. Your presence, awareness, and unshakable strength reflected every move they made, showing not only their plans but also who they really were. From the time you said you wouldn't play the part, they wrote for you to the time your silence and strength made their lies come to light. The story played out like a lesson in plain sight. They never thought you would live longer than their story. They didn't get that your growth, energy, honesty, and even the fact that you were quietly watching them would ruin their plans without a single fight. Those who thought they were in charge of the story found out that their own arrogance, overconfidence, and lack of morals were what brought them down. Every confession, every truth that came out, and every plot twist were all going to happen, not because of luck, but because truth and strength are forces that can't be stopped, changed, or killed. And the best part was that you didn't have to fight. You didn't have to prove anything or seek justice. They tried to hide everything and plan everything carefully, but it all fell apart because they weren't ready to face you. The consequences of their actions were the way you showed them who they really were. The story that happened shows that honesty, awareness, and steady growth will always reveal lies, no matter how well they're hidden. If this breakdown hit you hard and made you see how unstoppable truth and resilience are, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss these eye-opening truths. If this video made you shiver, give it a thumbs up. Please leave a comment below with your thoughts or experiences, and share this with someone who needs to see how power and truth always find their way. This is a time of awakening, and you are seeing it happen. Stay in touch because the story isn't over yet. Always be blessed.